So we hear all about the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the Basij, and that they're getting struck right now. And the question is also out there, who's actually running Iran these days? These are some of the things that we're going to deal with in this video. But before we do that, I just want to mention yet again, Israel365news.com. It's a news website based in Israel from, of course, Israel 365, the wonderful organization that I work for. I lead Israel 365 Action. If you go to Israel 365 News, you get headlines and you get analysis pieces. Right here, the top one is about Iran's disinformation campaign and Hezbollah, a top story, Hezbollah launching rockets into Israel, and lots of great columnists and great information and podcasts and a lot of great links on Israel 365 News. You can really get up-to-date news from a faith biblical perspective without missing a beat. You cannot rely on accurate information that matches your values coming to you organically through the algorithm. You have to seek it out. So go to Israel365news.com and you can use that as your news source, and you can click the subscribe button up here in the top corner, and then you'll get an update in your inbox every day, and that could really help you out. And I'd really appreciate it if you followed what we do there. All right, let's get to it. So first of all, some news, some headlines relating to what's going on the ground. Tehran drone attacks wipe out dozens of Iranian regime enforcers within minutes. This is from last night. State-affiliated Fars reports 10 dead in mysterious overnight assault, but other sources say toll far higher, with scores of Basij and security personnel killed at checkpoints across Tehran. Iranian officials blame Mossad and monarchists for the attack. Iranian media reported an unusual Israeli drone attack in Tehran on Wednesday night, with semi-official Fars news agencies saying that they struck checkpoints at several locations. So there were IRGC and Basij security checkpoints that were being attacked by drones. They said that explosions and clashes were reported at multiple points in Tehran, and that about 10 security personnel were killed, including members of Iran's security forces and the Basij, a militia linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. We'll learn more about who they are in a minute. Other sources said the toll among regime operatives was much higher, claiming dozens of Basij members being killed within minutes. Fearing unrest, the regime's Basij forces set up checkpoints on major streets to restrict civilian movement. This is how they're getting into position to prevent protests. So they've been setting up checkpoints all over Tehran. So what did the Israelis do? They went in last night and they carried out drone strikes on those checkpoints. And remember, Iran no longer has air defenses. And I talked about this in an earlier video, that now that there's no more air defenses, the Israelis can just put drones over the area, hover around, and basically have their way with the Iranians. And this also means that looking downrange at possible demonstrations in the streets, it means that the Israelis are going to be able to defend the protesters in real time. They're going to be able to have drones there taking out IRGC or Basij people who are firing on protesters. Okay? So this all happened last night. And we should also remember that Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed the Iranian public and said, I mentioned this in a video yesterday, and he said, quote, "In the coming days, we will create the conditions for you, the Iranian people, to take your fate into your own hands." Okay? Netanyahu said that, and he said that right before these strikes. Okay? So that's what we're seeing right now in Iran. And then the Jerusalem Post reported that there were strikes that targeted Iran's Bank Sepa data center in Tehran, disrupts military IRGC salary payments. Look at this. The data center of Iran's state-run bank Sepa was hit by a strike in Tehran on Wednesday. The disruption at the bank, which is largely responsible for paying the salaries of Iran's military and the IRGC. Right? So they struck the data center of the bank. They struck the bank. They destroyed the data center. And the strike occurred early in the day. The attack occurred while the bank was processing salary payments for the military. On Tuesday, both Bank SEPA and another state-run institution had services disrupted. What's that? They both had services disrupted in an apparent cyber attack. The disruptions continued on Wednesday with online banking inoperable. And then, of course, there was this actual attack on the bank. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi addressed the attack, saying, "This time, a branch of my country's oldest bank was bombed while full of employees. They were laboring to ensure Iranians have food on the table ahead of our New Year." We have the Iranian New Year coming. We're Persians, right? And it's our country's oldest bank. Trying to appeal to the sense of Persian identity. Yeah, sure. Ensuring that Iranian citizens can put food on the table. He also promised that Iran's armed forces will extract retribution for this. Okay. And there were also media outlets, including Iran International, also reported explosions across several neighborhoods in Tehran. Okay, so Tehran, the capital city, and there you have, so the IRGC, so you have IRGC and Basij getting attacked at their checkpoints. And then we also have their bank and their data center that was in the process of processing salaries, and that's how they have money flow out to the hundreds of thousands of people in their apparatus. This was all bombed. Okay, and then we have this story. IDF says it destroyed most of main assets of Iran's internal security forces and Basij in Western Ilam province. The Western Ilam province, that's where the Kurds are. The Israeli military says it has destroyed most of the central assets of Iran's internal security forces and Basij paramilitary force in the Ilam province in Western Iran. Okay, in the past week, the IDF says it ramped up strikes on the IRGC, on the internal security forces and Basij in several areas of Iran. Okay, the military says that Iran's internal security forces and Basij in the Ilam province carried out numerous terror plans and, among other things, conducted brutal repression during the protests of December and January. Okay, but that's Ilam province is where the Kurds are. So here you have what the Israelis, I mentioned this a few days ago, that the war was moving into a new phase. The initial phase of the war was ballistic missile stores, ballistic missile launchers. They're still cleaning that up. And nuclear sites, right? It was very much like military sites. And then it became bases, military bases, IRGC bases. And now what they're doing, they're going, first of all, we have this region, we have the Kurdish region, and the Israelis have been hitting numerous bases out there. And now they've destroyed all of the Basij or most of the main assets in that region, opening it up, clearing it out more for a possible ground incursion by Kurds. Okay, you have that going on, but you also have them bombing the banking system of the IRGC and taking out these security checkpoints that were being set up to prevent popular uprising. You can see where the Israelis are taking this. Okay, and it's emphasizing here, this is the Israelis doing this. The Americans are not involved in this piece of what the Israelis are doing. Okay, now, Al Jazeera, and by the way, it's interesting, I had to put on a VPN to get to this because Al Jazeera is blocked in Israel. Has Trump misunderstood Iran's IRGC and the Basij forces? This is an old piece from the beginning, from March 1st, from the second day of the war, right from the very beginning. And Al Jazeera ran this piece, but I wanted to go back to it now because now that we're talking about the IRGC, I wanted to educate us a little bit more about who they are. Okay, so this article is look at the title, Has Trump Misunderstood Them? And what it's referring to is that Trump early on said, he made a statement on the first day of the war, to the members of the IRGC, the armed forces, and all the police, I say tonight that you must lay down your weapons and have complete immunity, or in the alternative, face certain death. So lay down your arms, you'll be treated fairly with total immunity, or you will face certain death. And the article then goes down, it gives a little bit of a background of who the IRGC is, that they were built to protect the Ayatollah after the revolution in 1979, because the army had worked for the Shah and they wanted a loyalist group. This is very common in totalitarian regimes, that you have like a militia that is more loyal to the regime, separate from the army, kind of like the SS in Germany, which also had its own air force, and and it was kind of like the regime army, and they work together in good times, but it protects the regime. That's its main purpose. And it's composed of ground, naval, and air forces, meaning the IRGC is a full army, ground, naval, and air forces, troops and includes an internal security paramilitary militia known as Basij. Okay, great. And then it talks about a little bit about what they do. But the main thing I wanted to get to is this. Here. What is the Basij? Because you keep hearing that word in the news these days. Basij. Also founded by Khomeini in 1979, the Basij is a volunteer paramilitary force that falls under the IRGC and enlists civilians motivated by their devotion to the country, meaning to the regime, though some analysts say young men also sign up for privileges and economic betterment. The group, considered to be deeply ideological, often made up of young working class men, they are estimated 450,000 personnel in the group. Understand this. The IRGC is only about 180,000. The Basij is 450,000 personnel, according to the Institute for Study of War, though that also includes members who manage the group's communications and socio-cultural programs. Okay, so I've talked about the IRGC being about 180,000 plus their families. It's more like, if you add in the Basij, it's closer to over 600,000 plus their families. We're talking about millions of people who are part of the regime. Okay, that's why I keep saying taking down the regime is not a simple matter. I'm still not as optimistic as many people are. Basij personnel are often deployed on the front lines of protests and have played a large role in countering uprisings. They're the ones who gunned down protesters. Okay, during the Iran-Iraq War, they were encouraged to undertake martyrdom missions. They would clear minefields in human waves. They would commit suicide to clear minefields. They're crazy, right? That's what you think. So then they say, will they listen to Trump? The short answer seems to be no. Okay, let me back up here and explain something. Okay, this is so critical. I did an interview earlier today with Dr. Mordechai Kedar, who's a Middle East expert in Israel. And people disagree with him about some things about Iran, but there was this one point that we talked about extensively. You might want to go over to the Israel 365 News YouTube channel. It's linked in the description of every one of the videos on my channel. And I always tell you to go over there. It's not just because I'm promoting Israel 365 News. I put up different types of content there, deeper dive analysis content that's up there. So I put up a video there today. I think it was uploaded today. Sent it to my editor earlier. There's a video out there today, which is an interview with Dr. Mordechai Kedar. And one of the main points of the interview, we talk about the difference between Shiite and Sunni Islam theologically, or we might even say eschatologically, in terms of how they think about the end times, how they think about their faith. And of course, everyone, you read the news, you hear about IRGC, Basij, all these terms, Sunni, Shiite, we know they hate each other. But we drill down into how they think differently. And I'll just cut to the chase here, but go watch the interview. Shiites, their belief, their whole religious goal, the whole goal of their faith system is to bring the world to this apocalyptic end, where as a result of all the chaos and this apocalyptic turmoil that in the world, the Mahdi, who is this hidden imam, who is hidden away for centuries, is going to emerge. He's like a Messiah figure who's going to come out and emerge to save the day. And that might be part of why they've been able to play with this hidden imam thing with Mojtaba Khamenei, who might not even be alive, who they elected as the next supreme leader, but no one has seen him since day one of the war. They might be positioning him to be like he's like the hidden imam. But whatever, that's a side point. But Shiites actually believe that the way that they bring the perfect world is by bringing the world to a point of total chaos and apocalypse. And that's what summons the hidden, what's called the Mahdi. That's the Messiah figure. It summons the Mahdi. He comes and saves the world from the chaos, and Islam reigns supreme. It's a very different eschatology, a very different theology than Sunni Islam, so much so that Dr. Kedar pointed out that according to many experts, they aren't even really the same religion, Sunni and Shiite Islam. They're using the same Quran. Even that's not the same. There's some chapters in the Shiite Quran that aren't in the Sunni Quran. But the Shiites want to foment chaos. And also they place a much higher value on martyrdom. That's why Ali Khamenei was never going to run away to Russia or go into hiding. he was always going to die a martyr's death. It's part of Shiite Islam. Okay, you would have to die a martyr. I mean, they're much more into martyrdom. I mean, all Muslims are into martyrdom, but they're much more into martyrdom, and they're especially into this idea of bringing chaos. And Dr. Kedar used that to explain a lot of their behavior in this war. You have to understand that these are people who are willing to walk across a minefield to blow themselves up in service of the ultimate end. So they want chaos. They want escalation. They want to summon the apocalypse. Sunnis are different. Sunnis are much more into sort of traditional jihad, we might call it, or civilizational jihad, and going and conquering territory and winning people over and running for office and killing infidels, because they want, that's what they're into. Whereas for Shiites, they also want to kill infidels, but it's much more about bringing this apocalyptic chaos and end to the world. So that's why it doesn't bother them to be involved in the drug trafficking trade, for example. It's just bringing more chaos and turmoil to the world. Okay, this is just like very briefly getting into the mind of these Shiites. So if we get back to this this Al Jazeera piece here, right? If you have a supreme leader here they're quoting this former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Middle East, Michael Mulroy, told Al Jazeera, in Iran, if you have a supreme leader, there are multiple different power centers in the clerical and the military, the IRGC, the intelligence service. They are unlikely to comply with what President Trump has done. Everything that they are saying right now, including recent statements from Ali Larijani, is that they intend to escalate this and essentially turn the region into an all-out war, causing as much pain not only to the United States, but also the Gulf countries in the region. This was on the first day of the war, he said this, and it's exactly what has happened, because they want to escalate. They want things to get crazy. They want the ideology and loyalty to the Islamic Revolution and the supreme leader are key ideological tenets of the IRGC. Okay? Right. The IRGC is still very likely in control despite a turbulent year for Iran. And yeah, okay, so that's that piece. Now we're also seeing this article in Iran International, desertions and shortages and army IRGC rifts strain Iran's military. This is talking about the Iranian army, which is not the IRGC. Iran's armed forces are facing acute supply shortages, rising desertions, and deepening friction between the regular army and the IRGC. Among the most serious allegations are reports that wounded army personnel have been denied assistance by the IRGC. Some frontline units are operating with minimal ammunition, food, and drinking water. Okay, this is all good news for our side because it leads to more desertions, and that's what we want to see. So they're denying the medical report, they're denying the medical support, and there's all these frontline shortages. Okay, so we have that. And then we have this other article from Iran International, Iran's unseen new leader, and that's a key word because the unseen imam is the Mahdi. Iran's unseen new leader issues first message in writing. And this is kind of ridiculous. They came out with a message from him in writing. I'm not even going to bother reading it, but this is, so I believe that that the people running the show, we'll get into who's running the show in just a moment, in just a couple minutes, now that we've laid the groundwork, understanding the IRGC and a bit about their ideology and who they are, who's actually running the show if Mojtaba Khamenei, who's been elected as the successor, has not been seen in public, and now he issues his first statement as a written statement. So let me, there's this piece, a very interesting article that I found. I'm not going to read the whole thing because unfortunately it's beyond the scope of the length of, it's too long for this video. And it's on something called GIS Reports Online. Okay, and this is a very interesting website, gives intelligence reports, and its main audience is supposed to be business people and political leaders. Very interesting website. And they ran an article today called Revolutionary Guards Take the Reins in Iran. And in it, they go through some of the background of how the IRGC leadership has kind of taken over, and also what the prospects are for the future. So just in brief, at the very beginning, it says here, after the death of Iran's supreme leader, management of the country and its war was officially transferred as per the country's constitution, to a trio: the president, Pesach, and two senior clerics. But in practical terms, control passed to die-hard command of the IRGC, accompanied by two senior political figures, Ali Larijani, you probably heard that name, and Muhammad Bakir Kalibaf. Both are retired generals of the IRGC. Okay? Now, why is that so important, that they're retired generals of the IRGC? So to understand how the Iranian regime works today, you have to understand the relationship between Ali Khamenei, the dead Ayatollah, and the IRGC. Over the past decade, that relationship has slowly reshaped the entire Iranian system. So if you go back to 2013, at that point, Iran was under severe international pressure over its nuclear program. Okay, that's Obama years, right? The economy was suffering badly from sanctions, and the regime was worried about its own survival. So Khamenei at the time made a strategic decision that he would go into negotiations with the West over the nuclear issue. Now, if you think about what I just told you about Shiite ideology, you never want to negotiate because you just want to be a hardliner and go for maximum chaos, right? Sunni Muslims is different because they're more into like the kind of stealth jihad and the actual changing of people on this world and conquering territory. But for Shiites, if you're just trying to bring the apocalypse, why would you ever negotiate? So he knew that this would anger the hardliners in his system, especially the IRGC folks. So Khamenei justified negotiating with the Americans in ideological terms. He told the IRGC leadership that this was an example of what he called heroic flexibility. The phrase heroic flexibility comes from Shiite history, from back when the second Shiite imam, Hassan, this is back in the 7th century, temporarily gave up power to save the Shiite community from destruction. So Khamenei invoked that phrase at the time in 2013 and argued that he could do the same thing now, make a tactical concession in order to preserve the Islamic Republic. This is different than the doctrine of taqiyya that you might have heard about, which is about deceiving enemies when you're weak. This is not about deception. It's about a tactical concession to preserve the Shiite community to fight later on, okay? That idea became a turning point in Iranian political culture. It was talked about a lot, and it provided the ideological cover for the nuclear negotiations and ultimately the deal that was signed in 2015. But the deeper story is that Khamenei was always balancing these different pressures. On one side was the need to keep the regime alive economically and politically, and that's what led him to these negotiations. On the other side were the IRGC guys that were increasingly powerful and extremely ideological and were uncomfortable with compromising. Okay, over the years that followed, since 2013, since 2015, the IRGC expanded their influence in almost every part of the system. So veterans of that organization filled positions in the parliament and government ministries and the security services. And you see these top advisors who are now really running the country are former IRGC commanders. And they're the most powerful people in the country right now. The IRGC became a political class inside the regime. And meanwhile, Iran continued building its axis of resistance, right? Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, all that. And the regional situation in the years since the Iran deal, since the Obama-Iran deal started escalating. Okay, let's fast forward to 2024. Okay, in April of 2024, so we're about, like 6-7 months after October 7th, 7 months or so, Israel, you might remember this, Israel hit the Iranian consulate in Damascus and killed a senior IRGC commander, a Quds Force commander. And Israeli intelligence assumed that Iran would be very cautious in its response because Israel had killed Iranian officers before outside of Iran without triggering major escalations. They had done targeted strikes before. But this time, Tehran actually responded. Okay, the attack pushed the regime toward a more confrontational posture at the time. Now, at the same time as that was going on, there were internal pressures building in Iran, the pressures that ultimately led to where we are now. And that's the economic conditions that were absolutely collapsing. They were deteriorating. There were already protests spreading then, public anger about the economic situation. The IRGC, with the Basij, were still the enforcers, and they were meant, and their job was to suppress dissent and maintain order. So, and by the mid 2020s, at this point, 2024, 2025, they basically ran all the institutions. The IRGC was running all the institutions in the country. Remember, they were originally founded just to be the guards, the group that protected the regime, kind of just a military group. But at this point, they're controlling pretty much all the government institutions. The top advisors are IRGC guys. They dominated everything: security, foreign policy, large parts of the economy. All this is happening as Khamenei is really old, is getting older and older, and sick, and increasingly absent from public life. So if you put all that together, he wasn't really running the show anymore for two reasons. Number one, he was being pushed aside by these IRGC tough guys who had taken control, and he was more pragmatic. They were still a little bitter about the Iran about the nuclear deal, and they were taking more power. And meanwhile, he's getting sick, and he's not so involved in public life anymore, and they're really running the show. So everyone in the system understood that when he was gone, the balance between the clerical establishment, the Ayatollahs, and the IRGC could change dramatically. And that's what happened since the beginning of this war. Okay, so Khamenei gets killed on the first day of the war, along with several senior figures in the national security apparatus and the IRGC. But with Khamenei gone, with the supreme leader gone, there's now a power vacuum. So the IRGC guys, who were already the most powerful people in the country, they stood up and took control. Okay, that's the story of the last decade or so, right? It's a system, it once revolved more around the supreme leader and the clerical establishment, gradually shifting towards this military revolutionary group, the IRGC, who are taking more and more power for themselves. And now, with Khamenei gone, they've basically seized power in Iran. Okay, now a lot of that is in this long article. And then at the end of the article, it's a long article. At the end of the article, it then goes through scenarios of what could possibly happen next. Okay? And it says the most likely scenario, according to them, is mutual exhaustion and ceasefire. U.S. maximum goals not met, regime survives. That's what they say is the most likely outcome. None of us want that outcome, but it could be, and I've been warning about it, what I call like kind of fake regime change. The regime sort of survives. The U.S. says that they've accomplished their goals and they go home, right? That's what they say is the most likely scenario. And I sadly say I agree. It depends how much the Israelis can create more and more conditions that don't even allow the regime to survive at all. But it's not so simple. What they call somewhat likely is a prolonged war of attrition, where the regime is so weakened that even if the Americans stop and the war is officially over, there's going to be shortages of water, food, gasoline, electricity, and the IRGC doesn't mind killing millions of their own citizens to survive. And meanwhile, there's civilians rising up, and there's sanctions. The Gulf states are putting the squeeze on them, and that really the regime is so weak and battered that there's just this. It's like a war of attrition, and until it just deteriorates and deteriorates. But meanwhile, the IRGC is still in control. And then you have the possibility of a mass popular uprising, which they call unlikely, or a fissure at the top and a pragmatic way out of the crisis, which is also, I guess, a possibility, but not so likely. Okay, so there you have that. Now, to put all this into a more context, even Pezeshkian, the president, you might remember that a few days ago he apologized to the Arab states for the attacks by Iran on those Arab states, and then immediately after that, the IRGC basically said, "Shut your mouth," and they started firing, and they continued firing on those Arab states. So Pesach is a moderate. He's not an IRGC guy. When I say moderate, he's not really a moderate. He's more moderate than the IRGC. He's not an IRGC guy. He's what's called a reformer. He was brought in by Khamenei after Raisi was killed in the helicopter crash back in 2024. He was brought in with the promise that he would pay more attention to the economy, and as a way of showing that they're being less radical and less militant, okay, because he's a reformer. The IRGC guys have no use for him. So when he comes out, he wants to make peace. They basically said, no, 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 no. And they continued the war. And so here, look at this interesting headline. This is from today. Pezeshkian speaks with leaders of Russia and Pakistan, outlines steps to end U.S.-Israel war in Iran. And there's headlines like this every day. He's apologizing. He's looking for negotiations. He's looking for an off-ramp. And meanwhile, the IRGC, this is also from today, IRGC statement, enemy crimes will be answered at the same level. Full militancy, we're going full force. So if you're hearing mixed messages coming out of Iran of we're going full force, we're going to go to the end, we're going to, rah, 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 tough talk. And at the same time, you see Pezeshkian or others maybe talking more about being more conciliatory and looking for peace. It's because there is a power struggle going on right now. The people running the show as we speak are IRGC. They're the ones who wanted Mujtaba. So they wanted Mujtaba because, first of all, he's a low-level cleric, which means that they don't have to kind of bow to higher-level clerics that they might have to listen to who might be more moderate than him. He's a real extremist. And he's also maybe dead or injured or out of the picture. They can elect him, and then he goes into hiding, and they're basically running the show. So what all this means is that if the regime survives, and it still could survive, if the regime survives, it's going to become a military state run by these IRGC guys. That's what we might end up seeing, or more of a military state than it's been. Okay? Because the IRGC leadership is still running it. And again, the sheer size of the Basij and the IRGC, we're talking about 600,000 fighting men plus all of the other apparatus, millions. And there's millions of people here. This is not removing a regime and then the people all rise up. There are hundreds of thousands or over 1 million of these armed ideologues, these Shiites who want apocalypse and martyrdom, who are going to fight to the end. It's not, this thing is far from over, and it's far from a done deal. It's far from a foregone conclusion that the regime is actually going to fall. I know this was a long video, but I hope it was worth it because I think this was very important that we talk about these things, because we're hearing all this stuff in the media, Basij, IRGC, and I hope I sorted some stuff out and gave you some valuable information here. Please keep watching. Please keep sharing and telling everyone about the channel. Thank you again for helping grow it. Really appreciate it. God bless. Stay safe.